The blizzard hit Wyoming territory with such ferocity that Penelope Harper barely saw the rider approaching through the white curtain, until his horse nearly trampled her where she'd collapsed in the snow. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his face hidden behind a frost-covered bandana, and she felt strong arms lifting her from the frozen ground before darkness claimed her vision completely. When consciousness returned, Penelope found herself wrapped in heavy blankets before a roaring fire, her fingers and toes burning as warmth slowly returned to them. The cabin around her was small but sturdy, with rough-hewn logs and a dirt floor that had been swept clean. Animal pelts hung on the walls, and a pot of something that smelled heavenly bubbled over the flames. "You are awake." The voice was deep and careful, each word spoken with deliberate attention. Penelope turned her head to find the man who had rescued her sitting at a small wooden table, his hands wrapped around a tin cup. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell past his shoulders. His eyes were the color of creek stones, gray-green and watchful. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "My winter camp, about 15 miles north of Skidoo." He rose and brought her a cup of water, keeping his distance as he handed it to her. "The storm came fast. You were heading the wrong direction, into the mountains." Penelope's memory flooded back. The stagecoach accident, the driver's neck broken, the other passengers dead or dying. She had walked for hours, certain she was following the road back to town, but the snow had erased all landmarks. "The stage overturned. I thought I was going south. The wind plays tricks in these mountains." He returned to his seat and studied her with those careful eyes. "I am Wade Morgan. I run cattle in the summer months, trap in the winter, Penelope Harper." She struggled to sit up despite the dizziness that washed over her. "I was traveling from Cheyenne to meet my brother in Skidoo. He arranged for me to work as a schoolteacher there. The storm will last 3 days, maybe 4. Wade's tone was matter of fact. "You will stay here until it passes. Then I will take you to Skidoo." 3 days in close quarters with a strange man. Penelope knew what society would say, but she also knew she had no choice. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and alone in the wilderness with a cowboy she had never met. Her reputation would be ruined regardless of whether anything improper occurred, but better ruined than frozen to death in a snowbank. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Morgan. Just Wade." He ladled stew from the pot into a bowl and brought it to her. "You need to eat. Your body needs fuel to recover from the cold." The stew was simple but delicious, made with venison and root vegetables that Wade must have stored for the winter. As Penelope ate, she observed her rescuer. He moved with economy, never wasting motion, and his face held a stillness that spoke of long hours spent in solitude. There was a loneliness about him that resonated with something in her own heart. Wade kept his attention on the fire, occasionally adding wood to keep the flames steady. The cabin had only one room, and Penelope realized with some embarrassment that she occupied the only bed. "Where will you sleep?" "I have blankets. The floor near the fire is warm enough." He gestured to a pile of furs in the corner. "You keep the bed. You need it more than I do." Night fell early, the winter darkness closing around the cabin like a fist. Outside, the wind howled and threw snow against the walls with a sound like sand. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the rough walls. Penelope lay in the narrow bed, wide awake despite her exhaustion, hyper-aware of Wade's presence just a few feet away. "Mr. Morgan, I mean Wade, may I ask you something?" "Yes." His voice came from the darkness near the fire. "Do you live out here alone all winter?" A long pause. "Yes." "Do you not get lonely?" Another pause, even longer. "I am used to it." That was not the same as saying no, Penelope noted. She wondered what had driven this man to seek solitude in these harsh mountains, away from town and company. I have been lonely too. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago. My brother Thomas moved west shortly after, and I stayed in Philadelphia to settle their affairs. I have been living with my aunt, but she made it clear I was a burden. When Thomas wrote that he had secured me a teaching position, I packed my bags the next day. I am sorry about your parents. Thank you. Penelope pulled the blankets higher. What about your family? Gone. The single word was flat, final. Penelope recognized the tone of someone who did not wish to discuss the subject further, so she let the conversation lapse into silence. But it was a companionable silence, somehow less lonely than the quiet of her aunt's house had been. The next morning, Penelope woke to find Wade already up, preparing coffee over the fire. Her clothes, which had been wet from the snow, hung near the hearth to dry. He must have hung them while she slept, which meant he had been careful not to wake her. The consideration touched her. "How are your fingers and toes?" Wade asked without turning around. Penelope wiggled them experimentally. They were still sore but functional. "Better, no frostbite, I think." "Good, you were lucky. Another hour in that storm and you would have lost them, or worse." He brought her coffee and a plate of fried cornmeal cakes with molasses. The domesticity of the moment struck Penelope as oddly intimate. They were like a married couple sharing breakfast, except they were strangers who had met less than 24 hours ago. As the day progressed, the storm showed no signs of abating. Wade busied himself with small tasks around the cabin, mending a saddle, sharpening his knife, braiding new leather reins. His hands were competent and sure, scarred from work and weather. Penelope found herself watching those hands more than she should. To occupy herself, she explored the cabin's meager collection of books. Wade owned a Bible, a copy of Robinson Crusoe, and a slim volume of poetry by Longfellow. The poetry surprised her. "I did not expect to find Longfellow in a trapper's cabin." Wade glanced up from his work. "My mother loved poetry. She read to me when I was young." "Did she give you this book?" "No. I bought it in Cheyenne 3 years ago. It reminded me of her." Penelope opened the book carefully and began to read aloud. The words filled the cabin, giving shape to the empty air. She read the Song of Hiawatha and Evangeline, and though Wade kept his eyes on his work, she could tell he was listening intently to every word. When she finished, he said quietly, "You read well. You will make a good teacher." "I hope so. I have never taught before. The school in Skidoo will be my first position. Children need teachers. Skidoo is growing. There are more families now than when I first came 5 years ago." "You have been in Wyoming 5 years?" "Yes. Before that, Kansas. Before that, Missouri." Wade's voice took on a distant quality. "I kept moving west until I found a place that felt far enough." "Far enough from what?" He met her eyes then, and she saw old pain in his gaze. "From everything I lost." Penelope understood that feeling. She had been running, too, in her own way, from the emptiness her parents' death had left behind, from her aunt's cold disapproval, from a city that no longer felt like home. Perhaps that was why she felt such kinship with this taciturn cowboy. They were both refugees from grief. By the second day, they had fallen into an easy routine. Wade checked his trap lines near the cabin during breaks in the storm, returning with rabbits and once a beaver. He showed Penelope how to skin and prepare the animals, his instructions patient and clear. She found the work gruesome at first but gradually became absorbed in learning a new skill. "You are not squeamish," Wade observed as she worked on the rabbit. "I cannot afford to be. If I am going to survive out here, I need to learn practical skills." Penelope made the cut he had shown her, separating the pelt cleanly. "In Philadelphia, I was taught to paint watercolors and play the pianoforte. Neither of those skills will help me in Wyoming. You might be surprised. Beauty matters, even in hard places, maybe especially in hard places. His words surprised her. She looked at him with new appreciation. You are not what I expected a cowboy to be. What did you expect? Someone rougher, cruder, less thoughtful? Wade's expression remained neutral, but she thought she detected a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. I can be rough when needed, but I have had a lot of time alone to think. Sometimes thinking is all there is to do. That evening, as they shared a meal of roasted rabbit and potatoes, Penelope asked, "What do you think about when you are alone?" Wade considered the question for a long time. "I think about what I would change if I could go back. I think about whether God forgives certain things. I think about whether it is better to feel too much or too little. Those are heavy thoughts." "Yes." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What do you think about Penelope?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice did something strange to her heartbeat. "I think about whether I will ever feel at home anywhere again. I think about whether it is possible to build a new life from nothing. I think about whether I am brave enough to be alone. You are here. That took bravery or desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing." Wade turned to look at her directly. "You are braver than you know. Most women would be hysterical, trapped in a cabin with a strange man during a blizzard. You have not complained once. Hysteria would not improve the situation. Besides, you saved my life. I trust you." Something shifted in Wade's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You should not trust so easily. You know nothing about me. I know you gave me your bed. I know you have treated me with nothing but respect. I know you keep poetry because it reminds you of your mother. I know enough." The air between them seemed charged suddenly, thick with unspoken words. Wade stood abruptly. "I should check the horses." He pulled on his coat and went out into the storm, leaving Penelope alone with her racing thoughts. She was attracted to him. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She barely knew this man, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced with the suitable young men her aunt had paraded before her in Philadelphia. When Wade returned, snow-covered and shivering, she had heated water for washing. "You will catch your death," she scolded, helping him out of his wet coat. The horses needed tending. His teeth chattered slightly. "Sit by the fire. I will make you hot coffee." As she fussed over him, Penelope was conscious of how wifely her actions seemed. She brought him coffee, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, and sat beside him to ensure he was warming up properly. Wade seemed bemused by her attention. "You do not need to worry over me. I have weathered worse storms. That does not mean you should be careless with your health." Penelope surprised herself with her vehemence. When had she started to care so much? The third day brought a slight lessening of the wind, though snow still fell steadily. Wade announced that the storm would likely break by evening, which meant they would travel to Skidoo the following morning. Penelope should have felt relieved, but instead she felt a strange sadness. These 3 days in the cabin, despite the unusual circumstances, had been oddly peaceful. She would miss this quiet intimacy, this sense of existing outside normal time. "You are quiet," Wade observed as they ate their midday meal. "I was just thinking about returning to civilization. It will be strange to be around people again." Yes, he understood, as she knew he would. "It will." "Wade, may I ask what you will do after you bring me to Skidoo? Return here?" "I have another month of trapping before spring." Another month alone in this cabin. The thought made Penelope inexplicably sad. "Do you ever wish for different company?" Wade's hand stilled on his cup. "Sometimes." "What keeps you from seeking it?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, Fear, I suppose. I lost everyone I loved once. It is easier to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again. Penelope's heart ached for him. I understand. After my parents died, I told myself I would never let anyone get close enough to hurt me that way again. But that is not living, Wade. That is just existing. Perhaps existing is safer. Perhaps, but is it worth it? Their eyes met, and in that moment, Penelope knew they were no longer talking about generalities. They were talking about the fragile connection that had formed between them, this delicate thing that would be tested as soon as they returned to town. That night, neither of them could sleep. Penelope lay in bed listening to Wade shift restlessly on his pile of furs. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, she spoke into the darkness. "Wade, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These 3 days have meant something to me. I know we are strangers, and I know this situation has been unusual, but I feel more myself with you than I have felt in years. I needed you to know that before we leave tomorrow." Silence stretched between them. Then she heard Wade rise and move closer to the bed. He knelt beside it, his face barely visible in the dying firelight. "Penelope, you are the first person in 5 years who has made me want to be less alone, but I have nothing to offer you. I am a cowboy and a trapper. I live in a one-room cabin in the mountains. You are an educated woman, a teacher. You deserve better than this, better than me. Should I not be the judge of what I deserve?" Penelope reached out and found his hand in the darkness. His fingers were calloused and rough, but they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "I am not asking for promises, Wade. I just wanted you to know that these days have mattered. They have mattered to me too." His voice was rough with emotion. "More than I can say." They stayed like that, hands clasped in the darkness until the fire burned down to embers. Then Wade returned to his furs, and Penelope finally slept, her hand still tingling from his touch. Morning brought clear skies and blinding sunshine reflecting off fresh snow. Wade saddled his horse while Penelope dressed in her now dry traveling clothes. The ride to Skidoo would take most of the day, and they would need to make an early start. Wade helped her mount the horse, his hands steadying her waist. She sat in front of him on the saddle, acutely aware of his body behind hers, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. The position was intensely intimate, and Penelope felt her face flush. "Hold on," Wade murmured near her ear, and they set off down the mountain. The journey was long and cold, but Wade was an expert horseman, guiding them safely through the deep snow. They stopped once to rest the horse and eat some of the dried meat Wade had packed. As they sat on a fallen log, sharing water from Wade's canteen, Penelope gathered her courage. "Wade, when you bring me to Skidoo, will I see you again?" He did not answer immediately. "I come to town for supplies every few weeks. So you might visit me. Penelope, you will be the school teacher. People will talk if a man like me comes calling." "I do not care what people say. You should. Your reputation matters, especially for a teacher." "My reputation is probably already ruined. I spent 3 unchaperoned days with you in that cabin." Wade's jaw tightened. "Nothing improper happened. I know that, and you know that, but society will make assumptions. So if I am going to be judged anyway, I might as well see you again." A muscle worked in Wade's cheek. "You are stubborn." "Yes. Is that a problem?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, it is not a problem." They reached Skidoo in late afternoon as the sun was beginning to set. The town was larger than Penelope had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, and several side streets with houses. Wade rode directly to the schoolhouse, which was also apparently the teacher's residence, a small cabin adjacent to the one-room school. A man emerged from the school as they dismounted. He was in his early 30s, with sandy hair and a worried expression that transformed to relief when he saw Penelope. "Penny, thank God." He rushed forward and pulled her into an embrace. "We heard about the stagecoach accident. When you did not arrive, I feared the worst." "I am fine, Thomas. This is Wade Morgan. He rescued me from the blizzard and sheltered me until the storm passed." Thomas turned to Wade, his hand extended. "Mr. Morgan, I cannot thank you enough. You saved my sister's life." Wade shook his hand briefly. "I did what anyone would do. Nevertheless, you have my deepest gratitude. Please come inside. Let me offer you a meal at least and a place to stay for the night." "That is not necessary. I should get back to my camp." "Nonsense. It is nearly dark and you have ridden all day. I insist." Thomas was already ushering them toward the schoolhouse. "Besides, Penny should have a chaperone tonight, and my wife Martha will want to meet her." Wade allowed himself to be persuaded, though Penelope could see the reluctance in his posture. He was uncomfortable with thanks and attention, preferring the anonymity of the mountains. Thomas's wife Martha was a plump, cheerful woman with rosy cheeks and a warm smile. She fussed over Penelope, exclaiming over her ordeal and insisting she eat several helpings of stew and fresh bread. Wade sat quietly at the table, answering questions when asked but mostly observing. After dinner, Thomas showed Penelope the school and her small living quarters. The cabin had a bedroom, a sitting area, and a kitchen, all modestly furnished but clean and comfortable. Martha had already stocked the pantry and left quilts on the bed. "You will start teaching next Monday," Thomas explained. "That gives you a week to settle in and prepare your lessons. We have about 20 students, ranging from 5 to 14 years old." Penelope nodded, taking it all in. This was her new life. It should have felt exciting, but all she could think about was Wade preparing to leave in the morning, perhaps never to return. That night, Wade slept in the church which Thomas had arranged with the minister. Before he left, he found Penelope alone for a moment in the schoolyard. "I will be going before dawn," he said. "So this is goodbye, I do not know." His honesty was painful. "Penelope, you need to understand. I am not good at this. I have lived alone for so long, I do not know how to be around people anymore. And you will build a life here. You will have your students, your friends, your place in the community. What can I offer you compared to that? Yourself. That would be enough." Wade looked at her with an expression of such longing it made her chest ache. "You say that now, but you do not really know me. You do not know what I have done, what I am capable of." "Then tell me." He shook his head. "It is not a story for tonight, but I promise you this. If I do not come back, it will be because I think that is what is best for you, not because I do not care." Before Penelope could respond, he walked away, disappearing into the darkness toward the church. She stood in the cold night air, watching the space where he had been, wondering if she would ever see him again. The week passed slowly. Penelope threw herself into preparing for her first day of school, organizing the classroom, reviewing her lessons, meeting the families of her students. Everyone was welcoming, though she detected curiosity about her arrival in town. The story of the stagecoach accident and her rescue had spread, with various embellishments, and several women made pointed comments about the propriety of her situation. Martha was a stalwart defender. "My goodness," she nearly froze to death. "What did you expect her to do, refuse shelter? Wade Morgan is a decent man. Anyone who knows him would vouch for his character." "But 3 days alone," one woman whispered. "Surely something must have happened." If something had happened, would Wade have brought her directly to her brother? "Use your head, Agnes." Penelope endured the gossip with as much grace as she could muster. She had expected this and knew it would fade once people found something else to talk about. What bothered her more was Wade's absence. 2 weeks passed without any sign of him, and she began to lose hope that he would return. Her first weeks of teaching were challenging but rewarding. The children were eager to learn, and Penelope discovered she had a natural talent for explaining concepts in ways they could understand. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and history, and she read to them from the books Thomas had acquired for the school. She also started a poetry reading group for the older students, remembering how Wade had listened to her reading Longfellow. One of the boys, a quiet 14-year-old named Charlie, showed particular interest. His family was poor, and he would probably have to quit school soon to help with the farm, but for now he soaked up knowledge like a dry sponge. It was Charlie who first told her that Wade had been in town. "I saw him at the mercantile yesterday, Miss Harper. He asked how you were doing." Penelope's heart leaped. "He did?" "Yes, madam. He wanted to know if you were settled in and if the teaching was going well. I told him you were the best teacher we have ever had." So Wade was checking on her, even if he would not see her himself. The knowledge was bittersweet. She should probably accept that whatever connection they had formed in that cabin was not meant to last, but her heart refused to let go. The next Sunday, after church services, Penelope walked to the mercantile to purchase supplies. The proprietor, a kindly older man named Mr. Jenkins, greeted her warmly. "Miss Harper, good to see you. I have been hearing wonderful things about your teaching." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I need some writing paper and ink, please." As he gathered her items, Jenkins said casually, "Wade Morgan was asking after you last week." "So I heard. He is a good man, Wade. Keeps to himself but honest and hardworking. Known him for 5 years now, and he has always dealt fairly with everyone." Penelope sensed Jenkins was trying to tell her something. "Why does he live alone in the mountains, Mr. Jenkins? What is he running from?" The old man's expression grew somber. "That is not my story to tell, miss, but I will say this. Sometimes good people have terrible things happen to them through no fault of their own, and they carry that weight alone because they do not know how else to bear it. Wade is one of those people." His words stayed with Penelope as she walked home. She thought about the pain she had glimpsed in Wade's eyes, the careful way he held himself apart. Whatever had happened to him had carved something out of his soul, leaving a hollow he tried to fill with solitude. That evening, as she sat correcting her students' compositions, she heard a knock at her door. Her heart raced as she opened it, hoping irrationally that it might be Wade, but it was only Martha with a basket of muffins. "I made too many," Martha said cheerfully, bustling inside. "Thomas will eat himself sick if I leave them all at home." They sat together in Penelope's small kitchen, drinking tea and eating warm muffins. After some small talk, Martha said gently, "You are waiting for him, are you not?" There was no point in denying it. "Yes, he will come. Wade is cautious, but I have seen the way he looked at you that first night. He is fighting himself, but he will lose that battle eventually." "How can you be sure?" Martha smiled. "Because love is stronger than fear, dear. It just sometimes takes longer to realize it." 2 more weeks passed. Winter deepened, bringing more snow and bitter cold. Penelope maintained her teaching schedule, but every evening she found herself watching the road from her window, hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback. Then on a Friday evening in early February, as she was preparing dinner, another knock came. This time, when she opened the door, Wade stood on her threshold, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. "Hello, Penelope." For a moment she could not speak, then she stepped aside. "Come in, please." Wade entered, bringing the scent of cold air and pine. He looked leaner than she remembered, his face more weathered, but his gray-green eyes held the same careful intensity. "I apologize for not coming sooner," he said stiffly. I thought it was better to stay away, to let you settle into your new life without complications. And what changed your mind? I realized I was being a coward. Wade turned his hat in his hands. You said in the cabin that existing is not the same as living. You were right. I have been existing for 5 years, Penelope. I do not want to do that anymore. Joy flooded through her, but she kept her voice steady. What do you want, Wade? I want to court you properly if you will have me. I want to come to town on Sundays and take you to church. I want to sit in your parlor and talk with you like respectable people do. I want to see if what we felt in that cabin was real or just the circumstances. It was real for me, and for me. But I need you to understand what you would be taking on. I need to tell you about my past, about why I came to these mountains. Penelope gestured to her small sofa. Then tell me. They sat, and Wade was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with old grief. I was born in Missouri on a small farm. I had a wife and a daughter. Clara was my wife, and our daughter was named Rose. She was 3 years old. He paused, his hands clenching. There was a raid. Confederate irregulars, though they were really just bandits using the war as an excuse to steal and kill. They came to our farm looking for supplies. I was in the north field when I heard the shots. By the time I got back to the house, it was too late. They had killed them both. Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes. Oh, Wade! I hunted those men down. It took me 6 months, but I found every one of them. I killed them, Penelope. I am not proud of it, but I will not lie about it either. I became the very thing I hated, a killer. They murdered your family. You wanted justice. I wanted revenge. There is a difference. Wade's voice was raw. After it was over, I could not go back to that farm. I could not live in a place with so many memories. So I sold everything and moved west, kept moving until I found a place remote enough that I could be alone with my guilt. Guilt for what? For avenging your family. For not protecting them in the first place. For not being there when they needed me. Penelope reached out and took his hand. Wade, you could not have known those men would come. You were working in your field. You did nothing wrong. My head knows that. My heart has a harder time believing it. They sat in silence, their hands clasped. Finally, Penelope said, "Thank you for telling me. I know that must have been difficult. You deserve to know. If we are going to have any kind of future, it has to be built on truth." Are we going to have a future? Wade looked at her with such intensity it took her breath away. I hope so, if you still want one, knowing what you know now. I do. Wade, I fell in love with you in that cabin. I know it was only 3 days. I know it sounds insane, but it is the truth. I love you. His grip on her hand tightened. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you started reading poetry to me. But Penelope, I am broken in ways I do not know how to fix. I have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up screaming. I have days when I can barely speak to anyone. Are you sure you want to take that on? Yes. I am not perfect either, Wade. I have my own grief, my own fears. But maybe we can help each other. Maybe we can learn to live again instead of just existing. Wade pulled her close, and she felt the tension drain from his body as she wrapped her arms around him. They held each other for a long time, two wounded souls finding comfort in shared warmth. From that night on, Wade came to town every Sunday. He attended church with Penelope, sitting beside her in the pew, his hand occasionally brushing hers. After services, they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his cattle, about the wildlife he saw in the mountains, about the beauty of the land at different seasons. She told him about her students, about the books she was reading, about her hopes for the future. The town gossips had plenty to say at first, but as weeks passed and Wade's courtship remained scrupulously proper, even they had to admit there was nothing scandalous in their behavior. Martha and Thomas were delighted, and Thomas made a point of befriending Wade, treating him like a brother already. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, melting the snow and revealing the brown earth beneath. Wade brought Penelope wildflowers he had picked in mountain meadows, and she pressed them between the pages of her Longfellow volume. They went on chaperoned picnics with Thomas and Martha, and Wade taught Penelope to ride properly, his patience never wavering as she learned. One Sunday in April, Wade asked Thomas for permission to marry Penelope. Thomas gave it gladly, and that evening, as they sat in her parlor, Wade pulled a small box from his pocket. "It was my mother's ring," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "It is the only thing of hers I still have. Penelope Harper, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in June in the little church with the white steeple, with half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, and Wade wore a new suit he had purchased in Cheyenne. Charlie and the other students decorated the church with wildflowers. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Penelope with a tenderness that made her believe, truly believe, that they could build a happy life together. They spent their wedding night in the schoolhouse, which would be their home until Wade could build them a proper house. As they lay together in the darkness, learning each other's bodies with gentle curiosity, Penelope felt a completeness she had never known. This man, this wounded, careful man, was hers now, and she was his. Wade built them a house that summer on a piece of land just outside town. It was larger than his mountain cabin but still modest, with a bedroom, a kitchen, a parlor, and a small room that Wade said could be a study for her books. He worked tirelessly, and Thomas often helped, the two men forming a genuine friendship as they hammered and sawed. Penelope continued teaching, though she knew she would have to give it up if she became pregnant. The thought brought mixed feelings. She loved teaching, but she also longed for children, for a family to fill the house Wade was building. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Wade did have nightmares, violent dreams that left him shaking and sweating. Penelope learned to wake him gently, to hold him and murmur reassurances until his breathing steadied. On bad days, when the memories overwhelmed him, she gave him space but made sure he knew she was there when he needed her. She had her own struggles too. Sometimes the grief over her parents hit her unexpectedly, leaving her weeping in the middle of ordinary tasks. Wade would find her and hold her, not trying to fix anything, just being present. They learned each other's wounds and how to tend them, but there was also joy, more than Penelope had thought possible. Wade made her laugh with his dry observations about town life. She introduced him to new books, and they spent winter evenings reading aloud to each other. They made love with increasing confidence, discovering pleasure in each other's bodies and hearts. In their second year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. Wade's reaction was complicated, joy mixed with terror. She understood. The memory of his first child, his lost Rose, made this pregnancy both precious and frightening. "What if something happens?" he asked one night, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "We cannot live in fear of what might happen, Wade. We have to have faith that this child will be healthy and strong. I do not know if I can survive losing another child. You will not have to. I am going to be fine, and so is this baby." She spoke with more confidence than she felt, knowing the dangers of childbirth, but Wade needed her certainty. The pregnancy progressed normally. Martha, who had helped deliver many babies, checked on Penelope regularly and declared everything was going well. Wade became increasingly protective, insisting Penelope rest more, worrying over every twinge and ache. In March of 1884, on a cold but clear day, Penelope went into labor. Martha attended her, along with the town's doctor, a competent man named Dr. Stevens. Wade paced in the parlor, exactly as anxious fathers had done since time immemorial. The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke, Penelope delivered a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a thick head of dark hair. When the baby was cleaned and wrapped, Martha brought him to Wade. "You have a son," she said, placing the bundle in his arms. Wade stood frozen, staring down at the tiny face. Tears rolled down his cheeks unchecked. "He is perfect." "He is," Penelope said from the bed, exhausted but happy. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but Wade had been reluctant to choose one, as if naming the child might jinx things. Now he said quietly, "What about William? It was my father's name. William Morgan. I love it." Penelope held out her arms, and Wade brought the baby to her. As she held their son, feeling his warm weight against her chest, she looked at her husband and saw something in his face she had never seen before. Uncomplicated joy. William thrived. He was a healthy, happy baby who slept reasonably well and ate with enthusiasm. Wade was a devoted father, taking on midnight feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Penelope watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. As William grew from infant to toddler, he revealed a personality that was equal parts both his parents, curious like his mother, watchful like his father. He loved being outdoors, and Wade would take him on short rides on the gentlest horse, William crowing with delight the whole time. Penelope had given up teaching when William was born, but she did not regret it. Her days were full with caring for their son and managing their household. She also started a lending library in their parlor, opening it once a week to the community. People could come and borrow books, and she would sometimes read aloud to whoever gathered. It was a way to keep her mind engaged and to serve the community she had come to love. When William was 2, Penelope became pregnant again. This time, the experience was less fraught. Wade was still worried, but he trusted more in the process, in Penelope's strength, in the possibility of good outcomes. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the autumn of 1886. They named her Rose after Wade's first daughter. It was Penelope's idea, and at first Wade resisted, saying it would be too painful. But Penelope persisted. "She is not a replacement, Wade. Nothing could replace your first Rose. But naming this baby after her is a way to honor her memory, to keep her name alive. I think it would be beautiful." Wade eventually agreed, and when he held his newborn daughter for the first time, he whispered, "Hello, little Rose. Your sister would have loved you." Rose was different from William. Where he had been placid, she was fussy. Where he had been content to watch the world, she wanted to touch everything, taste everything, know everything. She kept them busy and exhausted, but her bright smile and infectious laugh made every sleepless night worthwhile. Life settled into a rhythm. Wade continued to run cattle, though he hired a couple of hands to help so he did not have to spend as much time away from home. Penelope managed their household, cared for their children, and maintained her library. They had built a good life together, rooted in love and mutual respect. But the past was never completely gone. Sometimes Wade would grow quiet and distant, and Penelope knew he was thinking about Clara and his first Rose. She did not resent these moments. Their memories were part of who Wade was, and she had accepted that when she married him. She would simply be near him, offering her presence until he returned to himself. One evening, when William was 5 and Rose was 3, Wade found Penelope in the parlor, mending by lamplight. He sat beside her and took her hand. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her set aside her mending. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about forgiveness, about whether I deserve to be this happy after what I did. Wade, we have talked about this. You avenged your family. That was not wrong. Maybe not. But I have been carrying this weight for so long, this feeling that I do not deserve a second chance. But watching William and Rose grow, seeing the life we have built, I realize that maybe forgiveness is not something you earn. Maybe it is something you accept." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I think your first family would want you to be happy. I think they would love that you have found love again, that you are a father again." "I hope so." Wade's voice was thick. "I will always love them, Penelope, but I love you and our children too. Both things can be true. Both things are true." She kissed him softly. "You have a big heart, Wade Morgan. Big enough for all of us." Years passed. William grew into a serious boy who loved animals and wanted to be a rancher like his father. Rose was spirited and clever, constantly asking questions that even Penelope could not always answer. Wade taught William to ride and rope, and Penelope taught Rose to read and write. They were a family, complete and content. In 1891, they had a third child, another boy they named Thomas after Penelope's brother. Uncle Thomas was delighted and became even more involved in their lives, spoiling his niece and nephews shamelessly. Martha and Thomas had children of their own by then, and the cousins grew up together, a boisterous, happy pack. Penelope sometimes thought about that night in the blizzard, when she had been lost and freezing, certain she would die. If Wade had not found her, none of this would exist. Not their marriage, not their children, not this life they had built together. It seemed miraculous, the way one chance encounter could change everything. Wade seemed to be thinking similar thoughts one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were finally in bed, and they had a rare moment of quiet. "Do you ever think about that storm?" he asked, "all the time?" "I almost did not ride out that day. The weather was so bad I thought I should stay in the cabin. But something made me check the trap line one more time, and there you were. Fate," Penelope said, "or providence, or just extraordinary luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful." Wade took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You saved me, Penelope. I was so lost before you came into my life. I had given up on happiness, on connection, on everything except just getting through each day. You brought me back to life." "We saved each other," Penelope corrected. "I was lost too in my own way. We found each other when we both needed it most." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from pink to purple to deep blue. 17 years had passed since that blizzard, 17 years of building a life together. They were no longer the wounded, wary people who had met in that mountain cabin. They had healed together, and in healing had become stronger than either could have been alone. William, at 16, was nearly a man now, already talking about the ranch he wanted to run someday. Rose, at 14, was whip-smart and determined to be a teacher like her mother had been. Young Thomas, at 9, was still figuring out who he wanted to be, trying on different dreams like hats to see which fit best. Wade had started letting the younger cowboys call him by his first name, had started going to town socials without dread, had even joined the church council. He was no longer the isolated man on the mountain. He was a husband, a father, a respected member of the community. He still had his quiet moments, still carried his scars, but he had learned to live with them instead of being consumed by them. Penelope had found her place in this western town, had built friendships and earned respect through her kindness and intelligence. She missed her parents still, but the sharp grief had mellowed into gentle sadness. She had created a new family, and though it could never replace what she had lost, it filled her life with meaning and joy. In 1895, William married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held at Wade and Penelope's house, with half of Skidoo in attendance. Watching her son take his vows, Penelope felt the bittersweet ache of a parent seeing their child become an adult. Wade squeezed her hand, understanding without words. Rose went to the teaching college in Cheyenne, determined to get her certificate. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of enthusiasm and ambition. Penelope saved every letter, proud of her daughter's accomplishments. Thomas, now 15, had decided he wanted to be a veterinarian, influenced by his love of animals and his brother's ranching. It would mean more schooling, but Wade and Penelope were determined to support whatever paths their children chose. In the summer of 1896, William and Emma had a baby, making Wade and Penelope grandparents for the first time. The baby, a girl named Clara, was perfect in every way. When Wade held his granddaughter, Penelope saw tears in his eyes. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That the cycle continues, that life goes on generation after generation despite all the pain and loss. There is something hopeful about that. There is everything hopeful about that." They were in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives. But they were healthy and active, still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Wade said, "Do you remember what you told me in the cabin, about existing versus living?" "Of course. You were right. I had been existing for 5 years before I met you, just going through the motions. But you taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope again. I need you to know that. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Morgan." She kissed him then, this man who had saved her from the cold and whom she had saved from loneliness. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Wade Morgan." The years continued to pass, bringing the changes and challenges that all lives face. Rose came home from teaching college with her certificate and took a position at the school in Skidoo, teaching the next generation of children just as her mother had. Thomas went to Denver to study veterinary medicine, writing home with stories about his classes and the city. William and Emma had 2 more children, filling their home with noise and laughter. Wade loved being a grandfather, patient and gentle with the little ones in a way that sometimes made Penelope's heart ache, thinking about the grandfather he would have been to his first Rose's children if she had lived. But she had learned, as Wade had, that grief and joy could coexist. The past did not have to diminish the present. They could honor what they had lost while celebrating what they had found. In 1903, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the house. William, Emma, and their 3 children. Rose, now courting a nice young man named Samuel who was a lawyer in town. Thomas, home from Denver with his degree finally in hand. The house overflowed with people and love and life. After dinner, as the family sat around the parlor, Rose said, "Mother, Father, will you tell us the story of how you met? The real story, not just the summary we have always heard." Wade and Penelope looked at each other. They had never told their children the full details, wanting to protect them from the darker aspects of the story. But they were adults now, or nearly so. Perhaps it was time, so together, trading off the telling, they told the story. Penelope described the stagecoach accident, her desperate walk through the blizzard, her near death from cold. Wade described finding her, bringing her to the cabin, the 3 days of the storm. They talked about the poetry reading, the conversations, the tentative connection that had formed between 2 wounded strangers. Wade told them about his first family, about the raid, about the years of isolation. Penelope talked about her parents' deaths, her loneliness, her search for a new beginning. They explained how they had found each other at exactly the right moment when both needed salvation. The children listened, rapt. Young Clara, now 7, climbed into Wade's lap. "That is the most romantic story I ever heard, Grandpa." Wade smiled and kissed the top of her head. "It is a true story. Sometimes the best stories are." William cleared his throat, emotion thick in his voice. "You have built a beautiful life together. You have shown us what real love looks like." "Thank you for that." "Here, here," Rose said, raising her glass. "To Mother and Father, may we all be so lucky in love." They toasted, and Penelope felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had been given. 25 years ago, she had been a frightened young woman stumbling through a blizzard, certain she would die alone in the cold. Now she was surrounded by children and grandchildren, married to a man she loved more with each passing year, part of a community that valued her. It was more than she ever could have imagined. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Wade and Penelope sat on their porch as they so often did, watching the stars. The air was cool but not cold, comfortable in the way of early autumn. 25 years, Wade mused. Where did the time go? Into building a life, into raising children, into loving each other. We did well, I think. We did very well. Penelope rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you have any regrets?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "I regret the years I spent alone after Clara and Rose died. I wish I had found you sooner. But then, maybe I needed those years. Maybe I had to learn to be alone before I could learn to be together." "Everything in its time," Penelope agreed. "We found each other when we were meant to." They sat until the stars were bright overhead. Two people who had started as strangers in a storm and become a family. The cold that had nearly killed Penelope all those years ago had led her to warmth. The warmth of Wade's fire, yes, but more importantly, the warmth of his love. And she had brought warmth to him too, thawing the frozen places in his heart, teaching him that it was possible to love again, to live again, to be happy again. The story of their love was not without pain or struggle, but it was real, deep, and enduring. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Years later, when Wade and Penelope were old and gray, sitting on that same porch with great-grandchildren playing in the yard, they would still hold hands and remember. They would remember a blizzard, a cabin, 3 days that changed everything. They would remember how offering shelter from the cold had brought warmth that lasted a lifetime, and they would be grateful, every single day, for the storm that brought them together. Their final years were peaceful. Wade's health began to fail in his 70s, his body worn out from decades of hard work, but his mind remained sharp until the end. Penelope cared for him with the same love and patience he had shown her so many times over their years together. One evening, as winter approached and the first snow began to fall, Wade looked out the window at the white flakes drifting down. "Do you remember?" he asked. "Always," Penelope said, knowing exactly what he meant. Wade passed away quietly in his sleep that winter, with Penelope beside him holding his hand. He was 76 years old and had lived a good life, far longer and happier than he had ever expected when he was that lonely cowboy in the mountains. Penelope lived 3 more years after Wade died. She spent those years surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, telling stories about Wade and their life together. She made sure they understood how much he had loved them all, how happy they had made him. When Penelope's time came, she went peacefully, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains where Wade had once made his solitary camp. Her last thoughts were of that cabin, of a young man with careful eyes who had offered her shelter from the cold, of how one act of kindness had blossomed into a lifetime of love. The family buried Penelope next to Wade in the Skidoo Cemetery, under a tall pine tree. Their shared headstone reads simply, Wade Morgan, 1851–1927, and Penelope Harper Morgan, 1856–1930. Beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, and friends, they found each other in the storm. Their children made sure the story was passed down through the generations. How their parents had met in a blizzard, how they had fallen in love during 3 days in a mountain cabin, how they had built a life together that lasted over 40 years. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love could be found in the most unlikely circumstances, that even the loneliest heart could be healed by connection. The house Wade built still stood decades later, renovated and expanded by subsequent generations, but still essentially the same structure. The lending library Penelope started had grown into a proper town library, with a plaque dedicating it to her memory. Wade's ranch was now run by William's grandson, a fifth-generation Morgan working the same land, and sometimes, on winter evenings when the snow fell thick and the wind howled around the eaves, the family would gather around the fire and remember. They would remember Wade, the lonely cowboy who had learned to love again. They would remember Penelope, the lost woman who had found her home. They would remember that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, and that offering shelter to a stranger can change not just one life but many lives, rippling forward through time in ways impossible to predict. The story of Wade and Penelope Morgan became more than just a family tale. It became a testament to resilience, to the human capacity for healing, to the transformative power of love. It reminded everyone who heard it that it is never too late to start over, never too late to open your heart, never too late to find warmth even in the coldest winter. And in Skidoo, Wyoming, on those long winter nights when the snow fell as thick as it had that day in 1883, people would look out their windows and think about the cowboy and the lost woman. They would think about how one moment of compassion had created a legacy of love that lasted long after both of them were gone. That was the real miracle, the family would say. Not just that Wade found Penelope in the storm, or that she survived the cold, or even that they fell in love. The real miracle was what came after. The choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through joy and sorrow, through challenges and triumphs, until death finally parted them. They had offered each other shelter, not just from the cold but from loneliness, from grief, from the wounds of the past. And in return, they had received warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from being truly known and truly loved, the kind that sustains through the hardest winters and makes even ordinary days feel blessed. Their love story had become legendary in Skidoo, but for Wade and Penelope, it had simply been their life. A beautiful, imperfect, deeply human life built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering commitment. They had been lucky, yes, but they had also worked hard at their marriage, choosing each other over and over again. And in the end, that was the lesson their family took from their story, that love is both gift and choice, both fate and effort. It requires offering shelter when someone needs it, accepting help when it is offered, and having the courage to believe that broken hearts can heal and lonely souls can find companions. The storm that brought Wade and Penelope together had long since passed into history. But the warmth they created, the love they shared, the family they built together, that endured. It endured in their children and grandchildren, in the stories that were told about them, in the lives they had touched during their time in Skidoo. And sometimes, on the clearest winter nights, when the stars shone bright over Wyoming and the world seemed very still. It was possible to imagine two spirits sitting together on a porch somewhere, holding hands and watching the snow fall, still grateful after all these years for the storm that brought them together, for the shelter they offered each other, for the warmth that grew from a single act of kindness into a love that lasted beyond death itself.